Sir, do you have identification and proof of residency right now?
You're inside a private residence without a warrant. State your legal authority.
Are you refusing a lawful federal order?
I'm asserting my
This entry
constitutional
is
rights.
unlawful and being recorded.
There is a universally understood boundary in American life, an invisible but profound line drawn right at the threshold of our homes. For centuries, the law of the land has maintained that unless someone possesses a warrant signed by a judge or faces an immediate life or death emergency, that front door might as well be a fortress wall. But what happens when the very individuals sworn to uphold the law convince themselves that these rules simply do not apply to them? What happens when an unfounded assumption, fueled by hidden bias, brings unchecked authority crashing right into the living room of a man who has spent his entire life defending that exact same law? We often think of our constitutional rights as abstract concepts, things debated in distant courtrooms by people in expensive suits. But the reality is that your rights only exist to the extent that you can defend them in the heat of the moment. Today, we are diving into an extraordinary true story about the collision between arrogant overreach and quiet, undeniable competence. It is a masterclass in how staying completely calm, knowing your legal footing, and hitting the record button can utterly dismantle a corrupt system. Before we get into the details of this incredible morning, I want to ask you a quick question. Have you ever felt like a situation was spiraling out of control and your only defense was the camera in your pocket? Let me know down in the comments, because today's story proves just how powerful that lens can be. The neighborhood was the epitome of suburban tranquility. Picture-wide, curving streets shaded by decades-old elm trees, meticulously kept lawns, and a profound sense of quiet predictability. It was the kind of community where people knew each other's routines, where weekend cookouts were a staple, and where any disruption to the peace was instantly noticed. For nearly 2 decades, a highly respected veteran of local law enforcement had called this peaceful enclave his home. He was a man who had dedicated over 30 years to public service, rising through the ranks to become the top commanding officer of his municipal department. He was a thinker, a strategist, and a man whose entire professional identity was built on de-escalation, due process, and the meticulous application of the law. His wife was equally formidable, though in an entirely different theater of operations. She was a brilliant cardiovascular surgeon, a woman who spent her days making split-second, life-or-death decisions with absolute precision and emotional detachment. Together, they were pillars of their community, embodying the very best of professional dedication and civic responsibility. The morning of the incident began like thousands of mornings before it. It was early, the sun not quite over the horizon, casting long, cool shadows across the frost-touched grass. Inside the house, the ambient sounds of a normal routine echoed softly. The coffee machine was humming, casting a warm aroma through the kitchen. The commander was standing near his sofa, dressed in the comfortable clothes he wore before shifting into his daily uniform. Out in the driveway, completely visible to anyone passing by, sat his unmarked but clearly official municipal pursuit vehicle. Inside the home, his gold shield of office and his laminated credentials rested plainly on a hallway table. Everything about the environment communicated transparency, authority, and belonging. Then the profound peace of the morning was shattered. The front door swung open. There was no knock. There was no polite inquiry. There was absolutely no legal justification. 2 federal agents, clad in heavy tactical gear, stepped aggressively over the threshold and into the private sanctuary of the living room. These men were operating on a dangerous cocktail of bad intelligence and overwhelming hubris. They had received an anonymous, unverified tip from a burner phone, and rather than conducting fundamental detective work to corroborate the claim, they chose to act on impulse. They were leaning on a highly controversial, heavily disputed internal memo from their agency, a document they falsely believed gave them the ultimate blanket authority to bypass the Fourth Amendment and demand citizenship verification from anyone, anywhere, at any time. They walked into the house with the swagger of men who had never been told no, expecting immediate submission. The commanding officer did not raise his voice. He did not adopt a defensive fighting stance. Decades of training kicked in instantly. He recognized the tactical disadvantage, but more importantly, he recognized the profound misjudgment unfolding in front of him. He carefully placed his coffee mug down on the end table. He shifted his weight, subtly positioning himself as a physical barrier between the heavily armed intruders and his wife, who was observing the chaos from the kitchen island. The lead agent began barking demands, his tone dripping with an unwarranted condescension. He demanded identification. He demanded proof of legal residency. He treated the homeowner not as a citizen endowed with constitutional protections, but as an immediate suspect. The homeowner responded with a calm, measured cadence. He verbally identified himself, clearly stating his rank and his jurisdiction. He gestured politely toward the table where his official badge gleamed under the foyer light. He pointed out the window toward his government-issued vehicle. He calmly explained the concepts of reasonable suspicion and lawful entry, attempting to walk the agents back from the legal cliff they were actively jumping off. The lead agent simply sneered. He dismissed the badge as a potential forgery. He waved away the vehicle as a meaningless prop. Blinded by his own prejudices and deeply ingrained biases, he looked at an elite law enforcement veteran and saw only a stereotype. He completely failed to process the reality of the situation, choosing instead to double down on his own flawed assumptions. This is the exact moment where the dynamic of the room fundamentally shifted. The surgeon, standing mere feet away, did not panic. She did not scream or argue. Instead, she reached into her pocket, withdrew her smartphone, and activated the high-definition video camera. With the cold, detached precision of a medical professional narrating a complex procedure, she began to document the unfolding civil rights violation. She clearly stated the date and the time. She zoomed in on the agent's name tapes and badge numbers. She verbalized the fact that her front door had been opened without consent and that no warrant had been presented. She was creating a pristine, unimpeachable chain of digital evidence. The lead agent, entirely oblivious to the trap he was walking into, escalated the encounter. He reached out and forcefully grabbed the homeowner's shoulder, loudly declaring that the man was now officially detained. That physical contact, captured in crystal-clear digital video, was the point of no return. It was no longer just a trespassing issue. It was an unlawful seizure. It was an unwarranted physical battery against a sworn officer of the law. While maintaining her steady recording, the surgeon used her free hand to interface with the home's digital security panel. With a few silent taps, she bypassed the audible alarm and sent a direct Priority 1 distress signal straight to the County Emergency Dispatch Center. If you are watching this and realizing how quickly a normal day can turn into a battle for your constitutional rights, take a quick second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We cover stories exactly like this to ensure that people know their rights and know how to protect themselves when the system fails. Have you ever had to use your phone to record a high-pressure situation? Drop a comment below and let me know your experience. Now, let's get back to the moment the tables completely turned. Less than 5 minutes after the silent alarm was triggered, the distant wail of sirens pierced the quiet neighborhood. The sound rapidly amplified until 3 fully marked patrol cruisers screeched to a halt in front of the house, blocking the driveway and the street. 6 heavily armed local deputies poured out of the vehicles. They instantly recognized the address. They knew exactly whose house they were responding to, and they knew that if a distress signal was coming from this residence, the situation was critically serious. The deputies rushed through the open front door, their hands hovering over their duty weapons, their eyes scanning for a threat. What they found was a surreal tableau. 2 federal agents standing in the living room, looking suddenly very confused, while their beloved commanding officer stood perfectly calm and his wife continued to hold her phone perfectly steady. The illusion of absolute federal power evaporated in the span of a single heartbeat. The local deputies quickly established a tactical perimeter inside the living room, vastly outnumbering the intruders. The lead agent attempted to assert his dominance, stammering about federal jurisdiction and anonymous tips, but his words hung hollow in the tense air. Then the homeowner finally issued his first command of the morning. His voice was quiet, but it carried the undeniable weight of absolute authority. He looked at the local deputies and instructed them to place the two federal agents under immediate arrest. The charges were clear, legally sound, and indisputable: forced entry without a warrant, unlawful detention, and physical battery of a municipal officer. The look of sheer, unadulterated shock on the agents' faces was profound. They had operated for years under the assumption that their badges were a blank check, a shield against any form of accountability. Now they were being forcefully turned around, their wrists locked in cold steel handcuffs, their Miranda rights being read to them by local beat cops. The predators had instantly become the prisoners. The fallout was completely unprecedented in its speed and its severity. By the time the sun was fully up, the highest levels of the Department of Justice had been notified. Elite federal investigators from a neighboring field office were dispatched to the scene. When these higher-level investigators arrived, they didn't protect their rogue colleagues. They took one look at the pristine, high-definition video captured by the surgeon and immediately realized they were looking at a monumental, career-ending civil rights disaster. The digital forensics team quickly went to work on the genesis of the incident: the anonymous tip. In today's digital age, anonymity is largely an illusion. Within hours, investigators traced the prepaid burner phone used to make the false report. They tracked the purchase to a local pharmacy, pulled the security footage, and identified the buyer. The culprit was a woman who lived just a few doors down the very same street. When investigators executed a search warrant on her property, the truth of her motivations came to light, and it was deeply disturbing. This neighbor had spent years harboring an intense, irrational resentment toward the commanding officer and his wife. She was profoundly bothered by their success, their prominence, and their mere presence in a neighborhood she wrongfully assumed belonged only to people who looked and thought exactly like her. Her personal computers revealed a dark descent into an online echo chamber. She had become active in radicalized digital forums, hidden corners of the internet where deep-seated bias and extreme prejudices were not only tolerated but actively encouraged. These forums provided her with the exact blueprints for weaponizing government agencies against people she disliked. She had been instructed on how to fabricate a tip, how to use untraceable phones, and how to trigger an armed federal response entirely based on her own profound misjudgments and toxic assumptions. Simultaneously, a massive internal audit was launched into the arrested federal agents. The younger agent, terrified by the prospect of federal prison, immediately broke ranks and agreed to fully cooperate with prosecutors. He pulled back the curtain on a deeply toxic culture led by his superior. The lead agent's service record was heavily scrutinized, revealing a staggering pattern of abuse. For years, he had utilized his authority to bypass the law, specifically targeting affluent minority neighborhoods based entirely on his own prejudiced assumptions. He had fabricated probable cause, falsified incident reports, and operated a localized reign of terror simply because his supervisors were too lazy or too complacent to question his methods. He had mistaken a lack of oversight for a mandate of absolute power. When the federal civil rights trial finally commenced, it was a media spectacle, but inside the courtroom, it was a surgical dismantling of an abusive power structure. The defense attorneys tried to argue that the agents had made an honest mistake, a simple procedural error born from a confusing administrative memo. But then, the prosecution played the video. They played it on massive screens for the jury. They watched the homeowner politely explain his identity. They watched the agent sneer. They watched the physical assault. The footage stripped away all the legal jargon and exposed the raw, arrogant bias at the heart of the intrusion. It was undeniable proof that the agents were not acting on intelligence. They were acting on unchecked prejudice. The jury deliberated for a remarkably short time before returning guilty verdicts across the board. The lead agent was sentenced to significant time in a federal penitentiary, forever stripped of his ability to work in law enforcement or carry a firearm. The younger, cooperating agent received a lighter sentence and strict probation. The neighbor who initiated the false call was prosecuted for conspiracy and filing a false report, forever branding her with a criminal record that exposed her hidden malice to the world. Shortly after the criminal trial concluded, the civil litigation was resolved. The government, eager to avoid further public humiliation, agreed to an astronomical multi-million-dollar settlement. It was a staggering amount of wealth, enough to secure the family's financial future for generations. But this is where the story elevates from a tale of personal vindication to a masterclass in systemic reform. The commanding officer and his wife did not keep a single penny of the settlement money. They didn't buy luxury cars or take early retirements. Instead, they took the entirety of the financial award and strategically reinvested it directly back into the justice system. They established a comprehensive ironclad trust designed to fund independent third-party oversight of federal and state joint task forces. They poured millions into outfitting every single local officer in the state with state-of-the-art body camera technology, ensuring that every future interaction would be documented with the same objective clarity as their own. Furthermore, they funded the creation of intensive, mandatory continuing education programs for law enforcement focused heavily on constitutional boundaries, the psychology of implicit bias, and the critical importance of de-escalation. The shockwaves of this event triggered immediate legislative action. State lawmakers, facing immense public pressure generated by the viral footage, drafted and passed sweeping new laws. These reforms mandated strict judicial oversight for any federal operations occurring within state residential borders, drastically limiting the ability of rogue agents to act without a localized, judge-signed warrant. The new policies forced an entirely new level of transparency onto an agency that had operated in the shadows for far too long. Months later, the quiet street returned to its normal rhythms. The leaves changed colors, the neighbors continued their weekend routines, and the commanding officer continued to park his municipal vehicle in his driveway. From the outside, it looked exactly as it had before the door was forced open. But fundamentally, everything had changed. The invisible boundary at the front door had been reinforced, not with deadbolts or alarm systems, but with the undeniable weight of legal precedent. The dangerous illusion of absolute authority had been shattered by a calm demeanor, an unwavering knowledge of civil rights, and the simple, devastating power of a smartphone camera. This story is a vital reminder that our systems are imperfect, and occasionally, the people entrusted with power will deeply misuse it, driven by their own fatal misjudgments. But it also proves that when we remain grounded, when we refuse to let fear override our logic, and when we document the truth, accountability isn't just a possibility, it is inevitable. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of knowing your rights and standing your ground peacefully, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The more we discuss these scenarios, the better prepared we all are. What do you think was the most critical mistake the agents made that morning? Let's get a discussion going down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Keep your eyes open, stay informed, and I will see you in the next video.